This is Climate on the Edge, where we explore the frontier of climate interventions and dive into the bold ideas that could shape our planet's future. And I'm Susan Su.
The Global South is where there's lots of unused crop residues because the valorization schemes that we know in North America or Europe are not there. So a lot of crop residues end up being burnt, landfilled, thrown in the river and the like. So there's actually lots of carbon being captured every year that is then left there and then going back into the atmosphere.
Hey everyone. I recently attended the Carbon Removal Capital Summit, a joint production between Xprize and the major global bank Santander. It was an awesome opportunity to get to flag down some pioneering Xprize finalists and hear more about their work. In this interview, I speak with Axel Reinaud, co-founder and CEO of NetZero. NetZero is another biochar company, and given biochar's prominence in the global carbon removal landscape, it makes sense that we'd have at least a couple of Xprize finalists pursuing this method. But NetZero is unique in their focus on creating biochar in tropical developing economies. I loved this conversation with Axel because we talk about how different carbon removal companies can leverage different advantages. And in their case, how business development advantage is lowering their cost of deployment. My absolute favorite point, though, is his non-consensus yet absolutely brilliant take on carbon removal as a market. That prices actually need to go up, not down, in order for this industry to live up to its trillion-dollar potential. Axel spoke with an honesty and a rawness that was refreshing and somewhat unique in an industry that feels like we can't show any cracks if we're going to convince the world to get on board. I hope you enjoy this chat with Axel Reinaud, co-founder and CEO of NetZero. All right, please say your name, your role in the company.
I'm Axel Reinaud. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of NetZero.
Axel, in one line, what does NetZero do?
We produce biochar in the tropics out of crop residues, unused crop residues. And we develop an integrated model by which we design the equipment, we run the equipment, we sell the biochar, we sell the carbon credits in a very integrated model that is now franchised to third parties.
In what specific barrier or bottleneck is NetZero unlocking? Why are you taking the specific approach that you've taken?
Maybe the specific approach, just to make things a bit clear, is so we focus on the global south and we focus on unused crop residues to convert them into biochar. We've taken this approach because the global south is where there's lots of unused crop residues because the valorization schemes that we know in North America or Europe are not there. So a lot of crop residues end up being burnt, landfilled, thrown in the river and the like. So there's actually lots of carbon being captured every year that is then left there and then going back into the atmosphere. The global south is also where the agricultural issues are the biggest, linked to climate change and also linked to the quality of soils. Soils in the tropics are in general poorer and more acidic than what we have in the north. And so the usage of biochar here has the most important effect on uptake for yield increase, reduction of fertilizers, and basically helping farmers get better income from their land. And so we thought we will focus our model there because of the biomass access and because of the impact on agriculture, but that requires specific solution. If you want to go after small pockets of decentralized biomass, and you want to produce high quality carbon credits, you need specific technology that is easy to install, easy to operate, operating with very high standards. And so basically there was no kind of specific solution for that for the production part, but also how to manage the end-to-end supply chain. And so what we're developing is a specific solution to go after about 1 gigaton of unused crop residues in the tropics and convert that into biochar and then put that in the soil so that farmers can improve their income.
What's unique about your structure? Who owns the assets? What are you selling specifically as a service or as a good?
For the moment, we've owned and operated our own plant. So we've designed, own, and operate. We are starting actually the model that will be the growth vector in the future, which is a franchised model. So we are basically packaging our whole offer, the end-to-end supply chain, from how you gather the biomass all the way to how you train the farmers to use the biochar in the fields and how you commercialize the carbon credits. And we are packaging that and opening up to third parties who have biomass, have issue with our soils, and are looking for a kind of one-stop shop solution. So today we have a first franchise plant under construction. We have another one that's sold and will start construction beginning of next year. And as of next year, our model will shift to 100% owned plants to a model where over time we'll go to 20% owned, 80% franchised.
What's surprising or unexpected about building carbon removal in the global south?
It's very difficult. So I think all the difficulties that you can imagine on a startup and building on a new market, because carbon is super new and there's still major issues around what is a carbon credit, at which price will it sell, what will be the regulation and the like. So we have all these uncertainties and difficulties that other carbon removal startups have. But also we have specific issues like you are in rural areas, in developing countries. So there's country risk, currency risk, operational risk, difficulty to have access to talents, and a lot of specific challenges. And in a way, you could say, okay, this is too complicated. Let's drop it. The tropics is the area of the planet of photosynthesis. And it's the area on the planet of massive carbon capture. So if we can't find a solution and make it work there, we're missing big time. So we said, okay, although difficult, we'll go there and we'll try to design a model, the technology, but also the end-to-end model that is super well suited for this environment. So to give you an example, we have very modular pre-assembled plants that are super easy to operate, are connected 24/7 by satellite. And basically that allows to do some remote monitoring of the plant, some remote technical support. So you don't need to have engineers and fly them in the middle of the countryside in whatever random country. We have integrated the MRV solution to our system. So basically the traceability from how you gather the biomass to the biochar usage is native in the system. And so even if it's very complex environment, very fragmented and the likes, we make sure of the data quality. And so all of these things are suited for where we operate, might not be that suited for elsewhere. But that's basically where the biggest potential for biochar is, the tropics.
Earlier today, I had a really interesting conversation with Martin Fremuller from Octavia Carbon. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that
I
company.
know that. Yeah.
So he made some great points about, didn't say it like this, but essentially boiled down to geographic comparative advantage. Now, when it comes to net zero, what of those principles are applying here? Are we looking at this opportunity that's geographically sliced and diced simply because of the cost advantage? Or are there other, the supply advantage, the kind of feedstock advantage? What are all of those factors that made you leave your native France? I guess you might still work there, but kind of come all the way over to Brazil and other places where you're operating to go and do this hard work?
There's an advantage, obviously, in terms of quantity of biomass and quantity of available biomass. So what we do is really additional and not competing or diverting usages. There's an advantage in terms of the value you get out of biochar, i.e., when you put it in the soil, the uptake in terms of yield improvement is massive. We're talking 25, 30, 40, and sometimes 50 or 60% increase in yield. This carbon captured from the atmosphere, we make something super useful and that creates huge value locally. And I think the third thing that is very specific to the global south is you maximize the co-benefits of what you do, because this solution creates, of course, better income for farmers, reduce their dependency from imported fertilizers, creates well-paying industrial jobs in the middle of countryside, And there are many other things like we produce renewable energy locally. And so available 24/7 and access to energy in those regions is also a big issue. So not only you capture CO2 from with a very efficient model in terms of cost, but you maximize the co-benefits for the people and also for the soil and the biodiversity locally. So we looked when initially setting up the company, we said, okay, where should we start? And we decided to go the hard way. The hard way is to go global south, crop residues. Most companies do developed country wood as feedstock. But because we're very convinced that this is where you maximize all the impact, and actually the motto of the company is for climate and people now, and we really want to balance the two. So it's, of course, for climate and for carbon removal. And that's one big source of revenue for the company. But it's also for people to change farmers' lives because they get higher yield, they get higher revenue per ton of their product because companies are willing to pay a price premium for decarbonized coffee, cocoa, sugar, and the likes. And so we really feel that our model is finding the best of the carbon world and the impact world and trying to wrap that into one very specific business model.
I love that you brought up additionality. And it strikes me that you're going after additionality on two levels, both on the carbon removal side and also on the co benefit side and on the community side. We spoke with Jason from Applied Carbon earlier today, and he mentioned not a stat, but a little factoid that most biochar is actually being generated off of bioenergy plants, which really calls into question some of the additionality factor on it versus what you guys are doing in these specific areas where there really wouldn't be an alternative. How do you think companies like NetZero can be or might be properly rewarded for all of these co-benefits that you're delivering that are so hard to quantify? They're easy to qualify, but hard to quantify today.
In the long run, we hope that the carbon credit market will put a premium on co benefits. So that's probably one angle. Today, prices of carbon removal are kind of opaque and all over the place and probably not at the place where they should be today, too low to sustain the growth of the industry. So that's one way to reward the co-benefit. I think the other way, which is very interesting, is that we see large agri companies willing to leverage biochar with our model to work with the farmers that supply them. So typically coffee, we signed a partnership with Nespresso, for example. So we get the coffee residues from the coffee production, we process that into biochar, and we bring that back to the fields of the farmers. And the benefit for the farmer is higher yield and lower cost of fertilizer. And the benefit for the brand, for Nespresso, is lower carbon impact on its coffee. Because first of all, there's insetting in the value chain. And second, there's reduction of usage of fertilizers, and fertilizers account for about 80% of the emissions of coffee production. And you have the brand, the end brand, which is willing to finance a premium on the carbon credits and actually on the biochar for its farmers so that basically they can benefit and help decarbonize their supply chain. So that's another way to look at how you can get some being quote unquote paid for the co-benefits. And I'd say the third thing is it's not does it come as money, but it comes as scalability. What we've seen in Brazil, we've opened the first plant about a year and a half ago. We opened another one like a few months ago. We have three more that are being built this year. And we start to see basically initially it was us pushing the model and trying to convince people and say, okay, look, you'll get all of this. And why don't you sign contracts with us to supply us with your unused biomass and you'll get biochar, blah, blah, blah. And now we're starting to see the thing flipping, people calling us and say, we have residues. Would you be willing to build a plant next to our facility? So municipalities, cooperatives, and the like. And it's because they see the benefits they can get for the local community. And so it does not translate into immediate margin for us, but it translates into scalability and ability to replicate our system. And I think long term, that's what you want. Because if we push biochar through the throat of people, at some point it will not work. Maybe there's a few sites where you'll manage, but at some point people will say, okay, guys, it's not for us. Here, what's very interesting is that you see the local people calling us and wanting it and say, why don't you come? And actually, municipalities give us the land, give us special tax exemptions and the likes. And people say, well, come here. And so I think that's the ultimate reward, which will be more scalability for the system.
That's really fascinating. I think in this space, companies have to leverage every advantage that they can get their hands on. And some companies have cost advantage, some companies have scale advantage, some companies have capital advantage. You're talking about this business development advantage, which I think is really unique in the way that your specific structure and the way the company is designed actually unlocks that in a really, say it again, but structural way is super fascinating for me. Okay, so Climate on the Edge is all about frontier interventions to the climate crisis. I'm curious to hear from you. You're working in this very cutting edge space of carbon removal, but also in a really novel way. When you peer out over the edge, what do you see as the next breakthrough, whether that's in your space, whether that's in carbon removal more broadly, or actually just across any climate interventions? What do you think we're going to be seeing come up in the next 10 years that is really still far out today?
I'd put it a bit maybe another angle, which is to say, what is hampering growth today? Because we all hear this need remove 5 to 10 gigatons by 2050, and we're late, and this huge industrial challenge to do. And at the same time, if you're looking today, there's lots of small companies. No one has really scaled so far, and it's difficult to get funding. The last 2 years have been quite difficult. And so I think what I'm hoping for is an unlock some of the blocking points. And of course, there's regulation and kind of regulation or the voluntary kind of SBTI like thing, clearing up the air and say, okay, this is good, this is not good. And now there's clarity and people can chase a model and not be companies worried about if I do this, am I going to be accused of greenwashing 3 years from now because someone will say, no, actually, this is not the way to do. So I think we need much more clarity here. The other thing is we need higher prices on carbon removal, and we need to change this idea, this false idea that prices can go down. Actually, prices on average need to come up. Of course, for this high tech thing like DAC, prices will come down because costs will come down. But if we want to scale the industry, we need to have companies that can be actually quite profitable because that's needed to attract capital, and capital is needed to grow. And today there's a kind of race to the bottom with I think a very false thing that offtake agreements where the buyer has an idea that a lot of what he buys is not going to be delivered. The one selling says, okay, I accept a very low price. We'll see later. We'll try to renegotiate. And that's anchoring basically prices below even cost of production. At least for biochar, that's what's happening. And I think the whole industry is doing itself a disservice because it's very easy to announce, oh, we have this 100,000 offtake agreement with company X or company Y. But in reality, this will never happen. The company that has sold at this price will go bankrupt. The one who has bought will not get the carbon credits. And in the meantime, we're anchoring a very low price. And so investors are saying, okay, prices are going down. This is not a good business. If we run the number with carbon credits at 120, 130, this is a shitty business. So let small companies maybe do small pockets where it might be profitable, and that's it. And we're completely missing what should be the positive momentum where there's a path to strong profitability for some players, and that attracts capital and helps build scale. Otherwise, we're never going to be at the 2030 or 2050 mark in terms of CDR. So I think that's, for me, it's a big source of concern, not necessarily for NetZero because we're well funded, but for the industry. I think we're going to start to see companies going under this year and next year. We're going to see that big time. And then there will be a kind of freeze for some time. And it's a bit like the e-commerce bubble of the year 2000. But here, we don't have time. We're already very late. We have a climate urgency. So losing 2 years, 3 years, losing some companies, losing some kind of momentum, we're going to pay a dear price in 2050 because in exponential growth If you lose 3 or 4 years, basically we will not get the 10 gigatons, we might get one or two. And then we're in big trouble. So I think there's a kind of collective responsibility to admit that the race to the $100 CDR is we're killing ourselves. I think there was a deal announced yesterday, I think at 100 on DAC. Let me laugh. This will never happen. But even in biochar, and we should recognize that CDR is costly. The cost for climate of 1 ton of carbon that goes up in the atmosphere is way above $200, the externality, and the prices should be high. We should not, for a nascent industry, try to treat it as a kind of industry at scale that then tries to lower the prices and so on. After 2050, yes, let's fight for the lower cost. But before that, let's fight for margin.
I love that answer. That is so awesome. Mic drop. Actually, there was a paper that came out earlier this year from ETH Zurich about the kind of questioning the three dominant DAC technologies' ability to come to $100 per ton. And I wrote about it and said, why do we even, who said 100? And of course, it's Frontier. It's a lot of these organizations that have a lot of sway, but it feels arbitrary and it's maybe not the right target for today. I'm really glad you brought up that point. I think
That's a good target for 2060, 2070, wherever, because we need to be super efficient. It's a bit like the car manufacturer thing. Initially, when the industry started, there were lots of small car manufacturers, pretty premium, and that helped develop the industry gradually. And there was lots of new technology brought by all those players, and then gradually they consolidated and likes. And then we went into mass production, and then we tried to reduce cost. And now we get cars that are technological marvels for actually quite cheap. But if you had started as soon as the first car manufacturers come, oh, let's make the cheapest car, basically you kill the industry.
Yeah, great. So working in climate tech and also working in emerging economies can be really challenging.
I still see a lot of energy, and in a way, there's no way out. Maybe we'll be late, but this industry will come because there's no way out. PCC says it. We've known that for a very long time. I was at the Rio conference in 1992 and things were already on the table. So it will happen too late. So that's the bad thing. But my hope is that it will happen anyway. So I see lots of energy, lots of technology, lots of creativity, and a market that will be there. I think we're a bit like the tech bubble of the year 2000 I was mentioning. So there was the initial hype, oh, this is wonderful e-commerce, then it crashed. But the fundamentals were there. Internet was there to change everything and has changed everything. It just took more time. And actually some pretty profitable companies emerged. So that's probably the path that we'll have to follow. That's bad because we are going to be losing time. But my hope is that we lose not too much time. My hope is that some people wake up to the emergency and that the regulators, all those kind of bodies that can influence corporates really put strong messages on now we set a direction and we move forward. That's my hope. I see also lots of, how can I say, positive feedback from innovative companies. In my case, in the agri world, most of them are still waiting, but some are willing to move. And I think that can create a model. That can create a model where, at least for biochar, what I see is that it's a profitable way to decarbonize. So usually we think, okay, carbon removal as a cost. So, okay, we need to pay something. We take the CO2, we convert it into carbon, and then we put it somewhere where basically no one will touch it forever. There are things where basically you make good use of the carbon, and hence weathering is also such technology, where actually you make good use of a waste and a nuisance, in a way, the CO2. And so I think there are some companies starting to realize that they can be good in decarbonization while actually making profits.
It's a profit center, not a cost center.
Exactly. And so if we can get this thing spinning fast enough, then maybe we can counter the kind of low carbon credit price and the like. So that's also my hope, that a few big companies will wake up and will commit a bit to the scale of the Microsofts and Stripes on the kind of CDR purchase, but more on the agriculture in supply chain usage of decarbonization. Again, the two that come to my mind are biochar and enhanced weathering. I'm sure there are many others. There are things in the oceans and the likes, probably many technologies. And so if we can get it, make carbon removal profitable beyond just selling the carbon credits, I think then that can unlock an acceleration that might counter a bit, what we're experiencing with pure offsetting. And I think the insetting way needs to grow and to be valorized at least as much as the offsetting way.
Thanks for listening to Climate on the Edge. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the show and consider dropping us a 5-star rating and review. You can also follow us on social media so you never miss an update. Climate on the Edge is brought to you by Emergence, innovative minds exploring climate's next frontier. Thanks again for tuning in. See you next time.